welcome to another new episode of Campus Stories. I'm your host, Vince Russo, and today we are happy to be joined by our guest, Greta Schiller, talking about her documentary past as a documentary filmmaker. What got you into documentary filmmaking?
Well, I'd say pretty much like what you guys are doing here. I was actually studying women's history at school, and I was a projectionist. At those days, you had 16 millimeter projection as a work study student for a film history class. And I really loved watching those movies and listening to that professor. And then I registered for his class, Dennis Donito, I'll never forget his name. And then Dennis and I kind of clicked, and then he said, we have a 2-year intensive BFA program, Film Institute, why don't you apply? And I did, and as they say, the rest is history.
Tell us, if you would, your career path that has kind of led you from those early beginning days to kind of where you are now.
Interesting. It's a long path. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, so that's a really long question. But basically, I think when I first started out, for one thing, there were so many more funding opportunities and so many fewer people applying for them, because I always have been very independent. I've always come up with an idea for a movie, raised the finance, made the movie, either gave it to a distributor or now I'm working with a distribution collective of social issue films, New Day Films. But as I said, I mean, does that answer the question enough? Okay, yeah. Sorry.
What gravitated you towards this specific genre of documentary filmmaking?
That's a good question. I would say within the documentary field, there are many genres, and I've worked in verite or observational and historical and recreation, historical interview, lots of different, whatever the subject, the story is that I want to tell. People have said I'll throw in everything, including the kitchen sink, to tell the story. So in many ways, I've been kind of a groundbreaker in things that now are common, but in the time, like The Man Who Drove with Mandela, nobody was doing stand-up one-man shows interwoven into a classic documentary. So I think I was always interested in, and I still am, my two sort of passions are like restoration of putting people who've been excluded or cut out of history back into history, understanding the history of the individual, the influence of the individual on the society in which we live, and the influence of the society on the individual. It's always been something that really interests me. And I always am interested in people who don't take no, who say, like interracial jazzmen of the 1940s, the women said, you know what, we're not going to say we can't play music. We're going to go out, we're going to have a band, and we're going to play music. I'm very interested in those kind of people.
So how does it feel to have had the work that you've done come to Emmy-winning acclaim?
Funny, I won the Emmy from one of my first big films. So I won it when I was really young. I was like 28. So in a way, it would like set me. It was both fantastic because it set me on. I knew, okay, I'm good at this, and that gave me the stamina to continue, in some ways. And of course, it helps with It's always nice to have a nice statue sitting on your desk. But also, I sort of expected. I sort of worked more on the margins of Independent Lens on PBS would show my film, not CBS News, not CBS, so to speak. But now all that's shaken up. But I don't know.
Talk a little bit about the Emmy-winning film, the name behind it, what it was all about.
Okay, Before Stonewall was a film that won an Emmy for Best Production and Emmy for Best Historical Research. And it was a film about the genesis of the gay lesbian community from the turn of the century, when the term sort of identity of a gay, lesbian as a description of a person as opposed to an act. Up to '69, which was when which is seen as the birth of the modern gay movement, which was when people rebelled. Gay people, police were attacking a bar, and they rebelled on the streets, and it was a tumultuous time in history. And they said, no, we're not going to take it anymore. And they were sort of following the lead of really the black civil rights movement. And so and the film took that I wanted it to begin at the turn of the century and end in '69, because what I was interested in is how you got from X to Y, how it went from being sort of a very isolated, fearful, not really vocal part of society to the beginnings of what we have today.
Well, we will be right back here on Campus Stories with our wonderful guest, so stay tuned and don't touch that dial.
These boys are my heroes. They come every week to spend time with my children.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
They can teach them something no one else can.
Wisconsin.
They're role models to the children, and homework comes way before sports. Their grades have improved, and their lives are just a bit richer.
Okay.
What they do for my kids is truly wonderful.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
I call them my lifeline.
People don't realize how quickly you can end up on the street. One thing happens in your life, medical bills you can't pay, you lose your job, and that's it.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
We went to DC to work with the homeless. They sell a newspaper called Street Sense. Thought I'd help.
But if you want to give more, you can.
This person came up to me and said, get a job. And for 2 hours, I felt what it was like to be homeless.
Good morning. $1 help.
Some of the other students said, how can we change this? And I said, sometimes you can't change the world, but you may be able to change one person's world. My dream? Open a psych clinic for people on the street.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
All right, we are back and are continuing our discussion with Emmy-winning documentary film director Greta Schiller. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
We went into the last break talking about Before Stonewall, the Emmy-winning documentary that you made. Is that the award that means the most to you throughout your career? And if not, which one does?
That's an interest. God, you got some good questions. It was, in many ways, it's the most, prestigious and significant, so very important to me. But very important to my parents. My dad used to brag about it all the time. And, but in a way, some of my audience award festivals where like the audience votes on a film and then you get the prize, that, in a way, that's equally important because I always want to touch the hearts and minds of my viewers. So the Emmy was prestigious and very important to me because it was my peers people above me, and not my peers because I was young, in the industry itself. But the audience award is the audience, and that's what you really want. So they're probably equal.
What was it like filming in South Africa for The Man Who Drove with Mandela?
That was shooting in South Africa was one of the great experiences in my life. Because for one thing, when I got there, I expected everything to be very segregated. But actually, and a lot of things were more integrated than in terms of the world that I was operating in, the crews I hired, the newspaper people, the radio shows and things. And one thing, though, was that they didn't have very many women, and they had no black women in technical jobs. And I try to hire local crew when I can. But they didn't, and everybody was saying, you're going to need security when you go downtown. You're going to need, you have to hire guys to stand around, protect you and the equipment. So I took their word for it. But what happened was, because I brought a black woman cinematographer, could have been you, from L.A. She flew over, and Michelle Crenshaw. And so since no one had ever seen that before, and we were shooting on 16 millimeter, so we had a lot of gear and lights and stuff, and what would happen is there'd be a sort of protective zone of neighborhood people who would stand around because they were just so in awe of this person. So that was cool. And it was a very exciting time to be there. It was the first time Mandela had just been released from prison, was running for president. People had became president during the course of the time that I worked there, and it was just a really exciting time.
Now, you said that the crowd was in awe. Was the reaction more positive?
Totally positive. Just like, wow, we're gonna take care of this visitor. There's also this enormous respect for America in South Africa at the time, because Americans were very active in the anti-apartheid movement. So, there was a certain respect for Americans then there. I don't know what it's like now, but it was pretty amazing.
Tell us, if you would, about the inspiration behind some of your films and where these ideas have come from over the years, specifically Paris Was a Woman.
Oh, Paris Was a Woman. I still love that one. Most of my films come out of something I've experienced in my life or something I really want to learn a lot about. That particular film, a friend of mine an English friend of mine, was there was a new television station called Channel 4, and a friend of mine was looking for programming ideas, and he just sent me it wasn't email then, it must have been a phone call or letter, or fax. We didn't have email. And he said, so he calls me and he says, do you want, can you put some ideas together for this new series? So thought about it and thought, I've always been interested in this community of women in Paris between the wars, and Gertrude Stein and Janet Flanner and Sylvia Beach, and American women living overseas and being creative and etc. So we started doing research, and I didn't get that TV commission from Channel 4 in England, but I did get money from other English sources, and the New York Council for the Humanities, and other European funding sources. And that movie I still love that movie, actually. That's one of my favorites. I still love going into their universe and being in Paris for a while.
So you talk about the research that goes into creating. What is that like? What is the process like, and how much research and how much time goes into it?
Well, I think one of the reasons that my films have such longevity is because they're so well researched. We don't just call up. I often work with Andrea Weiss, who's a researcher writer, and we don't just call up, an archive and say, what do you have on X? Because most of the subjects that we do, they didn't even have it organized by the categories that we were interested in. So we would go to the actual archives in Paris, in Washington, in New York, in Philadelphia, and look at the archive material, look at the art, I spent months in the library, the British Library in London, in the old reading room with the big dome, just reading the original manuscripts and publications and books and looking at the art that these women created. And then out of that came the genesis of the film. And then we had so much research that Andrea actually wrote a book, which has just been reissued, Paris Was a Woman, the book. So, yeah, the research is often, I can get too involved in the research, actually.
Well, we will be right back here on Campus Stories, so don't go anywhere and don't touch that dial.
Nicaragua is a completely different world. We were there to bring nursing care to some desperate people.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
The very first person that I met was David. Kept saying, "You have to come to my house and watch me play my trumpet." You could tell from the look on his face that it was just his most prized possession. I get back home. A few weeks later, I got a message that a gang had broken into his house at night and they stole it, which was his life. So next trip back, we gave him a new one. The look on his face was just complete disbelief. He just absolutely couldn't believe it. And to be able to do something like that was one of the best moments of my life. He said he'd never forget us.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
These boys are my heroes. They come every week to spend time with my children.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
They can teach them something no one else can.
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
They're role models to the children, and homework comes way before sports. Their grades have improved, and their lives are just a bit richer.
Okay.
What they do for my kids is truly wonderful.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
I call them my lifeline.
We are back here on Campus Stories as we continue our conversation with Greta Schiller. Which one of your films was the most fun and the most fulfilling to direct?
Oh boy, that is such a hard question. In a weird way, this sounds cliche, but each film that follows the next is the most fun. Because I have the distinct privilege of almost every film I've directed is something I've wanted to do. And that is such a gift that's very unusual. It means I don't always have the highest standard of living if I had a day job. But it does mean that I get to do, I always love the topics. I always love it.
Now, which one of your films would you say put you most on the map? We talked about all the accolades that Before Stonewall got. Is that the one that
launched? There's no doubt. Before Stonewall launched my career. I mean, even like I would say, for example, and it was invited to the Berlin Film Festival, which is a big international festival, and from that the film has been screened and distributed all around the world and continues to be so after 30 some years. So that film unequivocally launched my career. Yes, or my career, which is not different from my job.
So, which of the films was the hardest to direct? Which one was the most demanding and the most challenging and frustrating?
I would think the last film, No Dinosaurs in Heaven, which is a film about creationists teaching science. And it was very difficult. First of all, I was shooting in the Grand Canyon from a raft. That was really physically strenuous for me at my age. That was a few years ago. Luckily, I had two assistants, one of whom is technically wonderful, one of my former students. But also, that is such a huge topic, and there's so many ways to skin the cat, and I wasn't able to raise very much finance, so I had to do it through crowdfunding and labor of love. But finding a balance in the story and having a very strong point of view, but being fair to the creationist and representing their point of view fairly, that was very hard because I have such a problem with it.
I was going to say, how did you sort of tiptoe around and make sure that you did go about it in a respectful yet blunt manner, making sure that you did get your message across?
Well, first of all, this was the other thing that was really hard for me, was I used my own voice and my own story, because I had gone back to grad school and as a mature adult, and I was in a biology class, and my biology professor was a creationist, and I had serious problems with this. So, during a rough cut stage, I was screening it to a couple of people for feedback and what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, etc. And somebody said, you have to put your voice in. You have to put your own voice in as the point of view driving it. And I was really uncomfortable with that. But I did it, and she was right. And so that's one way, was I made it very clear this is my point of view. By the way, every science organization in the world agrees, but creationism is not science. Creationists should not teach science. That was just really clear. But that was hard.
And getting back to your documentary film past, which one do you look back on and have the most pride in? And I think we doted upon this with the fulfillment, but which one do you kind of look back on and say, that was my baby?
I kind of feel that way about all of them. They're all my kids, but they're all grown up and they have their lives of their own. But I think the International Sweethearts of Rhythm is a movie that I really I love it. I mean, it's a portrait of a multiracial women's big jazz band, and they've actually just sold that film to a Hollywood company, so you might see it on the big screen as fiction soon. But that movie resonates with so many different kinds of people who overcome different obstacles in their life, not just music lovers.
What was it like working with Andrea Weiss?
Well, Andrea is just a genius, and she has PhD in American history, and she's an incredible researcher. I mean, people, for example, in Paris was a woman. People who were doing the people who did who spent their lives researching that period, who saw the film were like, whoa, where did you get that? I've been spending 20 years of my academic career, and I hadn't, looked at it at that angle or found that piece of material. So, I rely on her.
What has it meant to dedicate your life to something that you are so passionate about?
Well, it's fulfilling and frustrating. Sometimes it's very frustrating because you want, everybody to change because you made a brilliant film that explains why they should think a certain way, and they don't. But I feel lucky. I just feel that I'm just really, really lucky, because I know a lot of people who work really long hours at something they don't really like to do just to put food on the table for themselves and their families. So, I feel privileged.
So you definitely feel like you've made the right career choice.
Oh gosh, oh golly, yeah. I mean, people today, young people often ask me, how did you do it? How can I do it? And the way I did it is probably not doable now in a certain way, because, as I said, what it costs for food and what it costs to get rent, and what I would say is get follow your dreams and do the best film you can, and hopefully it'll launch something and you'll be able to continue raising money or make films for someone who appreciates your skills, talents, and point of view.
We will take a quick commercial break here on Campus Stories and return with our guest. Don't go anywhere.
G-Morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did? Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
I'm starving. What's for breakfast?
Guten Tag!
Johannes, Franz!
I bring you arts-enriched Raisinblums, fortified with increased test scores and creative problem-solving skills.
It's good!
And good for you.
Bobby? Susie?
Don't worry, that's just the power of the art!
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit AmericansForTheArts.org.
You ever think about buying a bigger place?
Just waiting for a visit from the credit fairy.
There is no credit fairy.
How else will I get a better credit score?
Look, you keep your credit card balances low and only open a new card if you really need it.
No fairy?
There's no magic to improving your credit, but there's help, and it's free. Go to creditfairy.org.
Yes, ready.
Oh, come on, Randy. Animal shelter, here I come. And no, I'm not crazy or emotionally damaged. That's a stereotype. I just belong to a total loser. I'm a good dog. So if you want a pet, adopt. And if you see Randy, tell him he dropped his wallet.
Welcome back to Campus Stories here on RMU TV. Today we've been interviewing Greta Schiller, award-winning documentary film director. What is it like being a documentary film director? What is the career and the lifestyle like?
Well, for the first 20 years I traveled constantly, because first you travel to make the film and do the research, because I did international subjects. And then you travel to film festivals to present them. And so I was constantly on the road. And then I was living in Europe. I moved back to New York, and I became a mother, which meant that I didn't want to be all the time on the road and doing international things. So I started doing projects closer to home. I started doing projects that still resonated with me, but they were something I didn't have to travel a lot for. I mean, the downside is that you don't have much financial security, but I know plenty of people who've devoted their whole lives to jobs who don't have financial security. So, you know.
What are some things about this job that the average outside observer would kind of find as a surprise or a shock?
Well, you know, I did one of these presentation Q&A for some film students at a university in New York recently, and one of the things was that the people I interview for a documentary, the people who appear in a film, I actually do some casting. People were really surprised. It's not just like any person on the topic, but it's like, who do I think is going to provide so that I have a diversity of the way people look, the way people speak, what their work is. Sometimes I do pre-interviews with people and I realize they're just not going to come off on film. So then I find someone else who's more dynamic or more articulate or has a different angle, and people are often surprised by that.
If you had to pick a totally different career path and you couldn't be a documentary film director, what would you pursue?
Probably either architecture, or I love the idea of physics, but it's way above me. But I love the idea of, you know, from the subatomic all the way up to the whole universe, and that's an entire field of study. So that would be something I'd love to do if I had another chance at life.
Well, that is all the time we have for today here on Campus Stories. On behalf of our guests and our always awesome technical crew, I am your host, Vince Russo. We'll see you all again next week. Take care, everyone.